Hey there, and thanks for listening to the Beyond These Clinic Walls podcast. I'm your host, Julia, a PT turned product professional, joined by my delightful partner in crime co-hosts, Emma and Emily, founders of the Clinician Transition. Each episode, we interview former rehab professionals who have leveraged their clinical skills into non-traditional roles. I invite you to come hear the journeys, follow the career paths, and learn about the opportunities beyond these clinic walls. On today's episode, we are joined by Stephen Souvall, a physical therapist and software developer currently working for Software Technology Group in Salt Lake City. Stephen began learning to code in September 2020 and made the transition from clinical practice to full-time software engineer by July 2021. From physical therapist to small business owner to software developer, Stephen talks about his career path from the clinic to the computer. We chat about imposter syndrome, finding your flow state, and resources he used to get started in a career in software development. Happy listening. All right, well, we are here with Stephen, who is a background in physical therapy and now has moved into software engineering. So, Stephen, thank you for being here on Beyond These Clinic Walls.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I've been excited to do this.
Awesome. All right. My first kind of question, just to kick everything off, is I just want to hear a little bit about you and your background. Do you have a little bit of an interesting background where you didn't go right into PT? So if you kind of want to walk us through high level, just your experience, I'd love to hear everything.
Yeah, for sure. No, I studied German and political science in college, and then I just got done and kind of didn't know what to do with my life at that point, and coached rowing for a couple years because I was a rower in college, and it was kind of during that time that somebody approached me about PT, or I sort of heard about PT through the grapevine. I didn't really know what PT was. I think a lot of people who go into the field go into it having been an athlete and then they got injured and they had PT. I didn't do that at all. I was like, what's PT? And then I shouted at some clinics. I just knew it was athletic people got into it sometimes and that you might work with athletes and stuff. And I mean, I didn't know the half of it, of course, but went and shouted at some clinics, thought oh, this seems cool. This seems like these people seem like they help people and do a lot of good. So I got into it. I went through the, super hard steps to get to PT school and did the whole thing, went to PT school at the University of Puget Sound, and graduated in 2015. I primarily worked outpatient orthopedic with some home health mixed in there. And for the first 4 years, I was with a company, primarily one company at a few of their clinics, doing 2 patients an hour, not crazy volume or anything, but and then the last 2 years as a physical therapist, I started my own mobile PT company, and I did that for a couple of years, and that was kind of the last straw for me because that was I was having crazy anxiety and panic attacks and stuff, and I mean it was just so hard, it was a really good experience. I'm so glad I did it, starting a business and doing that whole kind of going that whole direction. I learned a lot, but that finally pushed me over the edge and spurred me to change careers. I'd always been curious about I'd always liked technology and been curious about computers and coding, and I just started writing some code on some online kind of learning platforms, and just really liked it and sort of followed that rabbit hole down, went to a boot camp and got a first coding job. So yeah, I've been a developer for I think just shy of a year now. It'll be a year in July that I'll be an actual employed software developer.
That's exciting. Congratulations.
Thanks.
Is it different having to identify yourself as not a PT anymore, where you're saying I'm a software developer?
It's super weird. It took me a really long time to even now when I use the title, I feel really like a imposter or something.
Yeah, imposter syndrome is real, right?
It's super real. And especially because I mean to be a PT, I went to 3 years of grad school and I did the whole track. I have a degree and a license, and yeah, I mean, I am a physical therapist. I'm licensed and this is my profession. And this it's I went to a boot camp, you
Yeah.
know. I don't even have a degree for it, but I feel I mean, conquering imposter syndrome, I think, is a thing
Yeah.
just with any skill set. But
Oh, for sure. I feel like I still, if I was to step into the clinic, I would still have imposter syndrome. So that, and now stepping into a new career path, it's so much more heightened. ask some of the steps along the way that's not on paper with each of those transitions throughout your career. So, my first question for you is what made you transition from being a staff physical therapist to opening your own business?
I feel like as I look back on my PT career, I feel like every step I took was like an attempt to see fewer patients
Mm,
and step away from like the grind of the clinic, which in hindsight was kind of an indicator for me that it wasn't the right profession for me. I mean, like I said, the company I worked for, it wasn't super high volume. It was like 2 patients an hour. I would work like a 10-hour day and I'd end up seeing, anywhere from 15 to 18 patients a day. And I've always kind of been a little more introverted and a little more, not like I'm shy or don't like socializing, but it's just that much time on is was really exhausting and really bled into my personal life and bled into my energy levels like on the weekends and in the evenings and stuff. I got interested in mobile because it was 1 patient an hour. I would be a little more autonomous, which I was. I mean, I would see maybe like 5 patients a day or something at most. So it was quite a bit more autonomous. But I wanted to get away from the like volume working for someone else and having to meet productivity standards kind of model and sort of do my own thing.
You bring up a good point of this constantly feeling like you're on. And I think with PT, you're having to be on so many different levels between it's not even just like a two-part brain, it's like a six-part brain that you're activating on. And then having the physical component of it too. So like there'd be times I remember when I'd be treating, I'd be like physically working on a patient while trying to think of like the next 3 exercises I needed for someone else, while having to diagnose someone else who wasn't coming in, remember my charting. There's so many, and then having to be personable and keep rapport with all the patients, and a lot of them who are in pain don't really want to be nice at the moment, or just all different personalities. So I really feel that exhaustion that comes with being on.
Totally. Physical therapy especially, and I think probably any healthcare because you're like you said,
Mm-hmm.
you're trying to like be personable with that person and listen and be empathetic and like also trying to think about like especially if you're
Yeah.
juggling 2 or 3 patients in an hour, you're like, okay, what's my other patient doing?
Yeah.
Like, is the tech or whoever they're working with like doing a good job? And then you got to chart like some places you're charting like real time. And man, I mean, yeah, it's so much juggling. And I think some people do really well with that. Like, I mean, there's definitely personalities that really suits, but I definitely wasn't one of them.
Yeah. Those people are like balls of sunshine. Like,
Totally.
like they're little like energizer bunnies. So it's interesting then you've kind of had this career change into being a small business owner. Actually, I'm assuming small. I don't know how big your clinic
Oh
was.
yeah, definitely.
But you definitely had to
Super
take
small.
on you definitely had to take on a lot more roles. Can you tell me about some of the new roles that you're taking on as the owner rather than just the staff physical therapist?
Oh yeah, like everything. I mean, obviously treating therapist, but I mean later on I did employ one other physical therapist that was full time with me. So I did share the treatment load, but we were both full time. But I mean, yeah, obviously treating therapist, but marketing was a big one that I was not good at first, and was really a skill set I actually feel like I got much better at. Managing the finances was really hard for me because I'm not a super organized person often, and it was so much detail, like tracking every little thing and making sure
Yeah.
you enter your expenses and enter. I mean, yeah, doing the QuickBooks stuff, and I mean, dealing with the insurance companies was such a headache. And I have so much respect now for the people who do like the office manager, like kind of and billing roles,
Yeah.
because that stuff is hard.
Yeah. For sure. I know. I've had friends and family when I was initially looking to move out of the clinic be like, oh, you should just start your own business. And like funding aside, time aside, just insurance, dealing with that alone was enough for me to like, no way, not going to happen.
Oh, for sure. It's its own job, like 100%, especially if you're billing
Yeah.
Medicare and you got to worry about. I was so afraid of getting audited and so afraid of like slipping
Yeah.
up and having a HIPAA violation. And you hear these horror stories of people
Right.
like companies getting penalties like in excess of $1 million. I was like, there's no way I can handle that, just little me with my little business.
Yeah. 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 Just trying to do good.
Yeah, I
I
was
know
like, I'm
it.
just
I
trying to
know
help
it.
people out and have a good career and stuff. So,
Yeah.
yeah, no, that was yeah,
Yeah.
a thing for sure.
what you said about having to deal with all of the non kind of clinical parts of running your own business, I wonder if, to the point we spoke about on the last episode, none of us are going to solve the systemic healthcare problems, but I just wonder if we took that all away, where you really were just seeing the patients and maybe writing your notes and not having to deal with that, do you think you would still be in patient care?
Good question, Emma.
That's a really good question. Yeah, I actually thought about that a lot in anticipation of talking to all of you because, there's yeah, because I see like posts from PTs like on the clinician transition and other places where people talk about non-clinical stuff, and a lot of the reason they want to leave is because of the system and the insurance companies and the productivity expectations. I think for me, the issue is not an issue with the profession itself. Like, I have a lot of respect for PTs, and I think there's a lot of problems in the system, and I think that would help a lot of PTs have a better career. For me, it was a bad personality fit. I wouldn't want to do it either way. I think it would have been better for sure, but at the end of the day, I just that much time being on, that much time trying to be the authority and come up with stuff off the top of my head for people to do and help diagnose them. It just wasn't a good fit for me. I mean, I'm much more happy. I've found doing more kind of like project based work where I can sit and sort of be in my thoughts and produce something at the end as an end result, but not necessarily. I mean, I'm happy to talk to people. I'm happy to do meetings sometimes and I have friends and all that stuff. But yeah, as a career, I'm much happier in a non-customer service kind of role.
Yeah, and for everyone who's listening, all millions of you,
Yeah.
that's perfect.
International millions of listeners. Yeah.
That I think that's perfectly okay. Where if you look at it and you're saying, is
Yes.
this I'm really not fit out for this, or is it I'm burnt out? And if I take away all the other stuff that's not patient care and it's still not a fit for me, then doing what people like us are doing in a non-traditional role, using our skills, most of us will probably end up in health tech, and then hopefully we can make that better for the people who do like that. Either way is okay.
I totally agree. That was kind of going to be my question because I think it can get easy when you're super frustrated too with the system or anything with the profession to kind of blame it on that. And then it's hard to see through, am I leaving because of the system or am I really leaving because it really just isn't a good fit? And that's 100% okay and legit either way.
Absolutely. And I think that is also important to be reflective about that in thinking of a career transition, because if you don't know why you want to leave PT and you aren't really clear on what it is about PT that you don't like, won't make as good a decision on what to do next. Because for me, I had spent so much time getting into PT and invested so much that I was like, if I'm going to switch careers, it better be a good fit. And I'm like, why don't I like PT? And for me, it was, I don't want to be social that many hours in the day. I want something a little more project based. Like, I try to get really clear on my reasons for switching, and then I selected a career kind of that fit that. But I think a lot of people ask me like, well, do you like software development? Who's a good fit for that and who's not? I'm like, you have to like really gear your career switch towards what you don't like about PT and what you want to be doing instead.
It's extracting the components of it that you really do enjoy and being able to sift it away from those that you don't.
For sure.
Can you tell us a little bit more about how you had that exploration of finding what components that you did enjoy? We talked about this on our pilot episode a little bit about how each of us kind of came to that, but I'd love to hear from you because for me, it did not happen overnight. It was a long, long time.
No, I'm in the same boat. It didn't happen overnight for me either. And honestly, I had this pressure on myself growing up and as I was like in college and trying to think about what I wanted to do with my life, that I don't know why I thought like I was supposed to do something where I worked with people. I felt like I had this like feeling like that's what I'm supposed to do. That's like the pressure I put on myself. And I don't know why, because I mean, that's the fact is I would have been much happier thinking about these things sooner, being like, well, hey, you really like to like spend long periods of time alone. Like, maybe working with people all day long isn't for you. And so I don't know. I guess, yeah, like you, it wasn't an overnight thing. It was like as I was spending my like 6 years in clinical practice, Yeah, I was just gradually thinking like, well, what don't I like about this? And it really came to light for me when I had my practice, and then COVID started, and I shut down for like 2 months. And I was just trying to figure out, like, that was a period of time where I was like, what do I do next? Do I reopen? I'm really not enjoying this, and I want to do something else. And I kind of explored a couple things, like I started like a drop shipping website that never went anywhere, and I was like just trying to do a couple other little projects. I like started to think about maybe making like a how to create your own clinic course or something. And I had these different ideas, and I started kind of go down this path with a couple of these different things. And none of them obviously came to fruition, but I think that process just got me thinking like, hey, this kind of work is, I think, something I enjoy more, like things that are a project. I can create something. Yeah, I don't really know how I stumbled upon actually software development as an option, because I always thought software developers were really good at math and like they had computer science degrees and stuff like that. I guess I just got to reading about it, and I found a couple online resources. There's a site called Code Academy where they have a little online editor, like it's just like a little code editor that's on the screen, and they sort of tell you what to write, and it's kind of a handholdy sort of learn to code process. And I just started like dabbling in that, and I was like, wow, I really like this. Yeah, from there I was sort of addicted.
So then what were the next steps after you kind of had a taste of coding?
From there, I watched a ton of YouTube videos on like how to learn how to code, because I was trying to figure out, there's so much, not like so much information out there, and so many programming languages. And for me it was just about kind of figuring out like what's my path. And my path was like, and I think probably the best path for someone getting into it was to be a full stack web developer. So web development is basically like developing anything that lives in a browser. So like an application that you visit via a URL, like Facebook, or the EMRs we use in the clinics, like any of that kind of stuff is a web app, right? So a full stack developer develops all the aspects of that, like knows how to do all that. Like they develop the front end, which is the side that is sort of like the user interacts with, like the buttons and the news feeds and all that stuff. And then the back end, which is the server side, data manipulation, business logic code, and the database, and all those aspects. You kind of want to have that full package. So by watching a lot of videos and sort of just informing myself on the basics, I came to that realization that that was kind of what I needed to do. And from there, there's just so many paths, courses. And so I kind of dabbled, like I said, in Code Academy, just to sort of get my feet wet in some of the fundamental like skills, which is basically HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And once I sort of felt like I had a basic understanding of those, it got a little boring and a little handholdy, like I said. So I just went on Udemy. There's a ton of courses on there, and you can find like a web development. There's a billion like web development boot camps that you can get on a Udemy sale for like $15 or like $20. And so I just got one of those and just followed it start to finish. From there, I kind of felt like there was a little more I was lacking, and I decided to go to a boot camp. It's not something that everybody has to do, but for me, it was helpful because having that 3 months of intensive full time, like I closed my business officially. I officially was like, I'm going to take this leap. I think mentally it helped me a lot to sort of like burn the boats, like I'm on the island and I'm burning the boats. Like I cannot go back. I've closed the business. I am letting my license lapse. We are a software developer now. Like this is what I'm doing. 2 weeks later, after I graduated, I got a job.
That's huge too. So that I feel like that doesn't happen often. Well, I have two questions. First is like, how did you know where you stood with your knowledge on coding and where you would be able to apply and fit into a role? And then how did you get your foot in the door?
That's a good question, because it's really hard to know. And especially if you're self-taught, like, and you don't do a boot camp, you don't go to, back to college and get a computer science degree, it is really hard to know like when you're ready. For me, that is part of why I went to boot camp. And I think I felt ready when I had like a couple of good projects I'd built that were full stack. Like they had uh, a front end that the users could interact with. They had a back end that had like some good logic and database, and they had like authentication, like a login and stuff like that. Like all the things you'd expect when you interact with like a business app. And when I was able to build that, I felt like, I still didn't feel ready, I guess, but I feel like I'm as ready as I'm able to be I was done with the boot camp and they were like, apply to jobs. And so I applied to jobs.
How good did that first project feel once you completed it?
Oh, it was
Like you
great.
had something tangible that you're like, woo, I did this. I made
It was
this.
awesome. But it was also a series of, my whole process was a series of like little projects. So it was kind of like an incremental gain, I guess, because like I started out and I built like a dumb little like
Mm,
landing page, or whatever, like
yeah.
super simple. It looks terrible and whatever. I mean, it was like I wasn't any good back then, and I just kind of would like play with stuff. I built like a I don't know, I built like a blackjack game or something. I don't know. I built all these little things with just what I knew, and then I sort of gradually, because I really enjoyed it, and I was like, I think I'll try to build this now, and then once I got to boot camp, then they were like, okay, you're building a blog. You need to build like the whole back end that processes all the posts and figures out what posts to send to the browser. And then you need to build the whole browser out and build a login and all that stuff. Make it so different users can log in and have their own account. And when I was able to do stuff like that, that was when I was like, okay, I have something I can show them in the field. What I know now is like a teeny breadcrumb of, a teeny little fraction of like all the things there are to know, and that's what's so cool about the profession. But it's also amazing, like you can learn so fast. I mean, you can like I would have never thought I could build the things I can build now, and I think I started to learn to code like a year and a half ago. I mean, I think it's been maybe 2 years now, and I'm like, man, I would have never thought I could build what I can build now. And it's just follow the steps, just show up every day and just do it, and that's all it takes.
And it sounds like you still have this appetite for it too. Like you're still excited at the next project that comes up.
Totally. I love it. I mean, I've never loved work like that I do, but like loved the type of work I do
Mm-hmm.
before. Like physical therapy, I
Yeah.
liked things about it. And then like coaching rowing, I liked things about it because I like rowing and all the little jobs I've had kind of through my life. It was always like, okay, like it's a job. But I
Yeah.
really like coding. I like building stuff. I like producing. I always feel like I found a backdoor way to like be a professional artist. Like I can create
Ooh.
something and I create like a
Yeah.
application or something that's like tangible, and it may
Yeah.
not be like a painting or whatever, but I mean, I feel like it's
Yeah.
it's creative, and I think that's
Yeah.
what people don't realize about software development. They're like, oh, this is this like mathy, nerdy, eggheady
Mm.
thing, and it's like, no, it's actually really creative work. Um,
Yeah.
so anyway, yeah, I just really love what I do, and I feel so fortunate to have found that. And I mean, honestly, software development and tech has changed my life. Like I'm night and day happier now just doing what I do. So
That's how I felt too when I transitioned now into product management. Was the first time that I was like, "Oh, I actually like love what I'm doing." And there's days where it's like not 100% perfect and you're still tired and exhausted and a million things going on, but I was still really excited about a new project or something I'm working on. And
for
a
sure.
fun little excerpt. So my dad is a children's book author and illustrator,
Oh, cool.
but I remember looking at him when I was little, and he would work for like 10, 12 hours a day. And then we would like go out to dinner. And on the placemat, he would still be doodling and drawing pictures. And I was like, how do I get to the point in my career where I've worked all day and then I sit down and I still want to do what I've been doing all day? And so I was like, that's kind of my inspiration
Totally.
for it. And this is like the first time I've actually felt, oh, I'm really enjoying what I'm doing. This is exciting.
Yeah, it's such a cool feeling, and not a lot of people get to have that, and it just makes you feel so fortunate to have it.
So you had a coding background, like you started to self-teach. Do you think that you really need that going into a boot camp, or is it like fair game to just be like, I think I'm going to be a software developer. I'm going to go to a boot camp now.
No, absolutely. You should self-study first. Not necessarily because like it's not like you won't succeed, but at least in my experience with the boot camp I went to, they spent what I spent time learning, which was HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, which are kind of like sort of the very, very basic fundamental three technologies you start with. They spent like 2 weeks on it. I mean, I was like, if I hadn't, and they spent 2 weeks on it, and we built like 5 websites from that in that 2 weeks. So if I didn't know anything, and there were a few people in my boot camp who had never touched any of that before, and they were like, "What is this?" And they really struggled. Also, just because before you invest the time and money, you want to make sure you like it enough. and you can really get a sense of whether you like it by learning, because you can build a lot with those things, with those three technologies, and they're really not easy to learn. I mean, I don't want to like downplay like the mental hurdle that is, because it's initially really hard to understand. Like JavaScript is like your first programming language you'll ever learn, where you actually use like programming logic and you learn all these like basic programming concepts. So I don't want to downplay like how hard that is to grasp those initially, because it is really hard if you've never touched it before. But if you show up every day for like an hour, you just do your online learning and you do that for a few months, like you can build so much and you'll understand. And yeah, I think people should do that before they invest in a boot camp, and it'll make you more successful for sure.
It was probably part of that like self-discovery journey almost too, when you're initially looking into what you wanted to do.
Oh, definitely. It was really informative for me to just sort of see how much I enjoyed building stuff with these things once I learned them, and how much I wanted to like not, I mean, I didn't want to go out on the weekends. I just wanted to stay home and like code up this little project I was working on. And I've never been like that before. So definitely it is part of the self-discovery journey for sure. Like figure out if I definitely think people should spend like a couple months learning these basic things on their own before investing much more time and energy and money, because that's about how long I think it takes to know, like, yeah, I like this, enough to do it for 8 hours a day, 8 hours plus.
It was interesting to me when you said you thought of yourself like an artist. With all the peace and love, my kind of perception and stereotype of the software engineer is almost like a radiologist. Like you want to just be in the basement with no windows, be, be away from everybody. And so I'm always interested when we do run into someone who has switched into software engineering, because PT are so with people out there, and I've always wondered about that transition to what my perception is of like the radiologist, so to speak, where you're kind of on your own in your own little world. You're not really doing that patient care, so to speak. And if a therapist is concerned about that, what would you say to someone who might be hesitating because of that?
I mean, you're spot on in a lot of ways. Like it is a harsh transition. If you like the people aspect of physical therapy, it would be a really hard transition, because you do spend hours at a time sitting and looking at the computer. And like, I mean, it is like art in a sense, because like a painter working on their painting all day, like they're not really talking to people. They're in the zone all day. So you have to like that and want that for sure. I think finding something that puts you in a flow state where you lose track of time is really what should guide what you want to do. And if working with people all day at the clinic puts you in a flow state and you're not watching the clock and suddenly, hours feel like minutes, then cool, find something that's like that. But if sitting and just getting in the zone with something and your own thoughts on your own is what puts you in a flow state, which probably the radiologist, that's probably what does that for them. And that's what coding does for me, then if that describes you, then this would work well for you. And if it doesn't, then you probably wouldn't like it.
Finding your flow state. I like that.
It kind of goes back to the concept of like how it's wise to test it out beforehand. And like if that gets you in your flow state, it's a good indication.
For sure. I mean, that is the test. Definitely. If you're like, this is kind of a drag, like I guess I could do this because it pays well. Like, no, you're gonna hate your life, because you feel isolated if that's not what you want to do.
So you've talked about some of the components that make you successful as a software engineer. So, you really like having a project to work on, having a tangible end product, and then just kind of being able to get into your flow state, as you say. What are you passionate about, and how did that change from patient-facing care to now the projects you're working on?
That's a great question, because there's a lot of things. I mean, just the intrinsic like satisfaction of building something is something I've become really passionate about. I have a real just intrinsic enjoyment of the building process and the thinking through a problem and that kind of stuff. And I'm also passionate about getting to spend time with my family. Like I get to work from home. I in between meetings and working on tasks, I get to go like play with my daughter, my 9-month-old daughter, and like hang out with my wife. And like, that's really awesome. And I'm really passionate about having that opportunity for work-life balance and, getting to enjoy the other things that I like to do.
Do you think you would ever tie in some of those other passions with where you're going now as a software engineer? So I'm thinking like for when I was transitioning out of PT, I was like, I'm pulling these components that I enjoy that I think I could build a role out of. But then, like, what effect, what influence do I want to have? What kind of change do I want to make? For me, I wanted to still stay within like healthcare and just improve the patient experience. So, is anything like that aligned with kind of what you're looking to do with software engineering, or are you just taking it project by project?
I'm definitely at the stage where I'm taking it very project by project. And initially, when I switched, I really did think that I wanted to do something related to healthcare, like just because I have so much expertise in that domain versus like other areas. And especially having done like sort of the administrative side a little bit too with when I owned my practice, I thought, well, if I could create something that was like that would help the marketing process or help the billing process along, or I think I went through a period, honestly, once I got into the profession and actually got my first job and was like successfully like I am now a software developer. I felt like I went through this whole like purging period of physical therapy. Like I was like, I don't want to think about physical therapy. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to do anything related to it. I was like, if I don't ever think about
I
PT
feel that.
again, I will be happy, you know? So
Yeah.
like the idea of like all my ideas that I had while I was in boot camp
Yeah.
and like while I was self teaching about building like a PT app that I could make a business out of were like, nah, never mind, you know. But now that I'm a little further removed from it, I mean, the idea of it would be really great. I think I would love eventually in my career sort of to come full circle and end up in a healthcare type domain again. I think that would be good. I've had a healthy distance from it now.
Yeah. It's also like, oh my gosh, there's a whole nother world out there aside from rehab sciences too.
I mean, and it's been fun to explore different domains. Like, I mean, the first company I worked for was like they did like software for mining companies. The one I'm with right now, I mean, I work for a consulting company, but like the client I'm with right now is like an agricultural wholesaler. Like, I mean, I'm doing such different things now from what I used to do that it's been cool. It's been nice to do different things.
So it sounds like you have no regrets from moving from PT and maybe coming full circle at the end, but not really any other polls to return anytime soon.
Definitely not. No, I am really happy with where I ended up. I mean, like I said, I have so much respect for the profession and people who do it, and I think it's super important. And like, I've never lost that like feeling of admiration for what PT can do for people, or OT, or speech therapy, or any of those disciplines. It just wasn't for me. I'm really happy doing what I do now. Just kind of found my zones.
It's also reassuring, I think, to especially for some of our listeners to hear that you're able to transition almost cold turkey from PT. Like you didn't have to go through a healthcare avenue to then get into software engineering and then switch.
Totally. And that could have been like everyone's journey is different, you know. I honestly think in a lot of ways with my job search and kind of how I approached it, the offer I did get, I think I got a little, I don't want to say I got lucky because I worked hard with job applications and trying to like get my resume really good, my portfolio really good. But also it is a little, there are elements of luck, and I just happened to like find a company that was hiring for somebody like me. Like, it was kind of a 3-month internship transitioning to a full-time job, which was perfect. The guy who owned the company kind of had a similar career transition back in the day, and he sort of like related to me, and we ended up hitting it off and I got the job. Where other people who I went to boot camp with, or other people that I've known through this process who are equally qualified as me or even more, just struck out more times than I did just by sheer luck. I think if someone were to make this transition, like I think it is helpful to try to like if you have expertise in a domain like physical therapy, for sure leverage it.
I feel like I have a lot of parallels with you for like a lot of your career journey, but definitely also kind of like a stroke of luck there where I did put the work in, but my current role now for product, it's really hard to get your foot in the door of product without experience. And so the hiring manager was the head of product who also came from a clinical background. And I think they were able to also kind of see themselves and me a little bit and was able to give a chance because same idea. I know other people equally as qualified that had to definitely approach it in different avenues.
Definitely. And I think people transitioning careers from something like physical therapy can have that advantage a little bit, because I think people who understand what we do, like or what PTs do, like do get that there's a lot of skills and a lot of like interpersonal skills and soft skills that come with that. And I mean, that's a unique personality that has not only the drive to get to that profession, but also to, do a good job and do good for people. And so, no, I mean, and there's plenty of people who've transitioned out and people who can relate to it. So if you can find someone like that, that's great.
Sometimes I feel like those people are hard to find because I don't think a lot of the general public recognizes just everything that we're qualified as physical therapists. Did you run into that at all? Did you feel like you had to educate others just to the level of qualifications you had?
Like a super wide variety, definitely. Like some people were
Yeah.
like physical therapy, like, oh yeah, so we're a personal trainer, and then
Yeah.
they didn't care at all.
Exactly.
And other people, I mean, yeah, yeah, they're like, okay, whatever, can you code? And
Yeah.
then, the most recent interview I had for the client I'm working with through the consulting company I work for, my manager, when I was interviewing with her, I started kind of, that she was saying, tell me about yourself, kind of opening lines of the interview. And I was telling her that I was a physical therapist before this. And, I was like, well, doing something for sure really different now. And she's like, no, it's actually really similar. Like, I understand you guys do a lot of problem solving and there's a lot of, the thought process is similar in a lot of ways. And I was like, wow, that's awesome. Like,
Yeah.
a lot of what we do, you know, but that
Yeah.
is rare. She really took me off
Yeah.
guard. I was really surprised about that. Most
Yeah.
people don't understand what PTs do.
No, they don't. Can we make that a little bit more concrete? Can you list maybe like 3 skills that you really feel like you're able to pull over from PT and apply in software engineering that helped you be successful in your role?
For sure, the biggest one is problem solving. The process that we go through when we diagnose somebody, really almost exactly the same. The process that we go through to like figure out a problem like a bug in software, or figure out how to approach a problem, like approach a new feature you're building out or whatever. I mean, you're kind of
Like
trying to like,
comically similar, right? Like
yeah,
that was the same for
exactly the
product.
same. You're
Yeah.
basically drawing a flow chart. I mean, in your
Yeah.
mind, like
Yeah. You're like subjective, objective.
totally.
Yep.
You're kind of like, okay, like you're starting the process, like gathering information. I mean, that's basically like gathering requirements for the software you're building, or gathering like all the data on a bug you're trying to fix or something. And then you're kind of going through this little flow chart in your mind of like a process, a regimented process.
Yeah. Like all the potentials and then how you can kind of take something really
Yeah,
complicated,
boil
make
it
it
down to
smaller.
something small. Break big problems into small problems. Like
Mhm.
that's the gist of what we do in an
Yeah.
evaluation in PT. I didn't know well enough to like point that out at the start. And I think that my current
Same.
manager talking about that with me in the interview, I was like, "Oh, I should really, like,
Yeah.
you're right. That's
Yeah.
totally true." And I think PT is trying to get into like anything involves problem solving should like really make that front and center in the things they can do, because it's huge.
It really is. I feel like it comes so naturally to us too once we're in the clinic because we're doing it every day that until you kind of take that step back. That was the same thing for me too. I was like a good month into product and I was like, oh my gosh, like light bulb.
Yeah, it's
It's
the
exact like
same.
same parallel. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, you'd think it's different because you're like not talking to people as much or anything like that, which was cool. That was a cool realization. And then I think the interpersonal skills actually play a big role too. There's a difference between just having kind of like good social skills and being sort of outgoing, and then having actually been a professional at like active listening, going in day after day, several times a day, to people you don't know and have never met before, and like acting nice and being approachable and asking them all these questions about themselves and like diagnosing a problem for them. Like that's like a really, really unique skill set. And I think that really helps in interviews a lot. And I mean, and obviously like during the job, you're not like doing that all day long necessarily, but it helps too for like your relationships with managers. And like, there are people on teams that, I mean, because you're in product, like there are people on teams that are like non-technical. To be able to like communicate something technical to somebody who's non-technical is something we do as PTs every day.
It's like explaining a diagnosis to a patient.
Yeah, and companies really value that skill. And I mean, I think like a lot of people don't have as easy a time doing that, so that's huge.
I think like the biggest part of that is just like communication skills, which all of what you were saying wraps into that. Because though we're not patient facing, we're still working with people cross functionally. And so the better you can communicate there, the better you're going to have that end product come out how you intended it to be successful.
Oh yeah, definitely. it is huge for sure. Like the communication skills are, you wouldn't think about it being as big a factor, but it really is. Not only being able to interview well for a job, but also being able to, yeah, communicate to everybody on the team, everybody involved in a project. Like it takes more than just like the technical people with their heads down on the computers to get it done.
Stephen, I want to just really highlight that whole response to Jules's question. I think that really exemplifies why at the clinician transition, we've kind of nudged people to the term non-traditional versus non-clinical. So I understand the non-clinical movement, but you just said so many things of what you used your degree for that to me, non-clinical is kind of insinuating you're just throwing that all out the door. And I think to kind of move our profession forward and really value what we've done, that kind of non-traditional shift is you're still using all of that stuff. It wasn't time wasted. We can celebrate it, just using it in a non-traditional way. Unless you're doing something where you're actively not helping people, you're non-traditional.
Emma, can you do the breakdown of your 3 different things for our listeners again?
Yeah, so I think of the 3 buckets. So you have traditional PTs, which is what we think of when we went to school and you're seeing patients in SNF, acute, outpatient, that sort of thing. Non-traditional, which is what all of us are doing. So we're really not seeing patients at all in the traditional sense. So we've done a formal kind of career transition. And then there's this middle hybrid that I think is coming out of the non-traditional traditional, where you're health tech and you're doing sort of a hybrid of you're still seeing patients but in a more modern way. So there are a few companies that are doing that. I'd even argue, Stephen, you starting up your own mobile practice. I mean, I had no idea that was an option in PT school, and if I did, I might have explored it. I thought that was just you had to have a ton of money and be a PT for 30 years when we're seeing a lot we're seeing a lot of people do that right out of school. And then
Yeah,
so the people that find that satisfying and they're able to kind of get the processes in place and really focus on the patients, that's been a really great option beyond what we think of a traditional brick and mortar mill, so to speak.
I was just going to say, I feel like that's where then the next piece of that puzzle is where our professional organizations can come into play. So, yes, we know we can do it. People are starting to be aware, but then more of that advocacy role of like getting the word out there to everybody that PTs are capable of these things, and even to schools. Like if someone comes into PT school wanting to go into product or software engineering, that we should maybe be welcoming this and educating them in school too.
oh gosh, I would love to see DPT programs have constructive business program or like leveraging those skills outside of just patient-facing care. Oh,
It would be so
that would make me.
helpful.
And even like in
Yeah.
the instance, Stephen, with you where you started your own business, there's probably many skills there. Had you had just like a little boot camp in school, that would have helped when you were down the road opening your own business.
Yeah, it would have been huge. Like it's hard for me to understand, and I'm sure, I mean, you're packing so much into a 3-year curriculum, so at least for
Hmm.
PT. So I get it
Yeah,
too, but not one business class, at least not in my program. And,
same,
I think
same.
there was an elective, but it's
Yeah,
like you should know how to navigate the insurance system and how to effectively
yeah.
bill. And I mean, I was
Whew.
clueless and I made so many mistakes early on that really cost me the ability to be effective and ultimately the ability to, be profitable. But if there was something in school, and this is so standard, being able to run a PT practice, I don't know if other
Yeah,
professions have that. Like, I don't know if physicians do that in medical school or if chiropractors do that when they go to chiropractic college, but we need that. And
for sure. Because
yeah, it would have been helpful.
yeah, right now as it's set up, I feel like from what I've observed in the clinic setting, the most senior PTs then become the clinic managers that then move on.
Right.
But I don't always feel like the best clinically treating PT is going to be the best business person and the
Right.
reverse.
And there's also in other professions too, like, well, especially like physicians. I mean, there's so many physicians who just go to medical school and then they
Yep.
become business people and they start health tech companies or they're like chief medical
Yeah.
officer for a
That
company.
that
And
MD
no one frowns
privilege.
on that.
No.
Yeah.
They sneak in there. They're like, "Oh, you're an MD. You must know. You must also have an MBA." You're like,
Yeah,
"Well,
you must be an expert on everything.
yeah." If you were able to go back in time, even in the past, what advice would you give yourself when you were first transitioning?
I feel overall pretty good about the path I took. I guess if anything, I would have maybe told myself to jump sooner, like
Mm,
into applying for jobs and trying to like have a little more confidence early on,
yeah.
because there is a lot of imposter syndrome, especially when you're self-teaching. And
Hmm.
I knew after I finished like just the online boot camp course, not even when I went to the actual boot camp, but by the time I finished that course, like I knew basically everything I learned in the boot camp to a smaller extent, but to enough of an extent that I could have built something that I could have presented in an interview and I could have gotten a job. Um,
Mm,
and I think people don't. I think it's hard to have the confidence
yeah.
to know when you're ready. I would have probably told myself I was ready sooner.
I really liked just the kind of the overall theme. There seemed to be a good combination of you willing things, but also letting things happen in their time. And it didn't just happen, like you said, overnight. You started as staff PT, you did the whole business thing, and then COVID hit, and that actually opened up a window for you. And then you took advantage of that. And I think I see a lot of people trying to make things happen, but then also getting frustrated that it's not happening organically. It's just good to remember that everyone has their own journey. It's just going to kind of unfold as you're also, making efforts. So I just, I like that overall theme.
For sure. And I think groups like Clinician Transition and all the resources that are available for people who are thinking this way. I mean, I think it is huge for people to be able to think like there are other options. Like, and it doesn't even have to be a transition completely out of the profession and doing something totally different. It, like you said, it could be like working for a company that does like digital like slash virtual PT, and you could be like a telehealth PT for them, or yeah, doing like a mobile practice. Or I wish that there was more information available kind of upfront when you get into the profession, like what options there are out there, because there's a lot and you're still contributing, you're still helping people. And more, I mean, I think there's going to be a shift towards that kind of stuff anyway, that kind of technology that people use, or those sort of, whether it's people wanting someone to visit them in their home, or wanting to do a telehealth visit, or wanting to use an app to do their own. If they have something kind of easy, they would just want to do an app to rehab. But there needs to be a PT or somebody advising on that. I mean, you're still helping people. Biggest question I get when people message me on LinkedIn is like, what was my process for actually learning and what should I learn? The biggest question is like, what programming language should I learn? And like, what should I do to get into this? You want to learn the front end, the back end, and the database. The client side, so if you think of like a restaurant, the front end is like the tables and the hosts slash hostess and the wait staff and stuff like that. And the back end is the kitchen, and you want to learn all that. So, you really just want to find some free, cheap online resources to start out, learn HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. JavaScript will teach you all kind of the programming concepts you need to know as a beginner and just sort of the basics. HTML is like the structure of like a web page. It's like the words on the page and the headings and the all that stuff. CSS is the styling language. They're fairly easy to learn if you spend a little time. And then from there, you need to learn a back end technology. I do C sharp and a framework called .NET. There's a bunch out there, and you just want to find one that's well established. It doesn't necessarily matter what language you pick. Just pick one. JavaScript has a back end technology called Node.js, and you can just learn that. And it's easy because you already know JavaScript. And then learn like a database technology. There's one called MongoDB that's pretty easy to learn, fairly easy to learn. SQL is really, really common. But you just want to pick a path, pick a front end technology, a back end technology, learn it front to back with a course. Find a boot camp course on Udemy. Like there's a bunch of them on there. Just search on Udemy, web developer boot camp. Pick the one that has the best ratings. There's a bunch, and just go start to finish. Just be persistent. Do like an hour a day until you're done. And then the other piece of advice I would give, the best advice I got for interviewing and getting a software job and being and standing above the crowd, is to just build good projects and really try to have something that you can present in an interview, and then actually have the courage and sort of the persistence to present it in an interview, even if they don't ask to see it, because they rarely will. Just be like, So they're like, hey, what's this concept? Be like, you know what? It's this, and I have a great example for you in this project. Let me share my screen, and then just do it. Don't ask, just do it. Have it ready to go. That's especially easy now when you're not having to go in person and interview, because it would have had to be that you bring your laptop and you like pop it open and there's a Wi-Fi connection. You can just have that thing open on your computer and just click share, and you don't have to ask permission, just do it. And and then you can start leading the interview in the direction of like your project, and they'll start asking questions about your project and how you did certain things. That's the best piece of advice I got that. I mean, that's the big thing my boot camp always talked about, but it was really good advice.
As Stephen said earlier, his experience is his own. There's a lot of other therapists who have become engineers that have taken different paths. We recently created a community on Slack. We have an engineering channel with people in there who are taking boot camps or maybe not taking boot camps. So we could keep Stephen on here for hours, but if you want to keep the conversation going and meet other people who are doing this and other things, you might want to check that out.
And I'm always happy to connect with people on LinkedIn. People can feel free to message me and ask me questions about what they should do. And I mean, tech changed my life and has done a lot of good things for me. So I'm always happy to help people, get that in their lives too.
If you've listened this far, hey mom and dad. Thanks to everyone for listening to Beyond These Clinic Walls podcast. Be sure to follow us on social media at LinkedIn and on Instagram for all the latest updates and episode releases. Also, make sure to check out and join the Clinician Transition page on LinkedIn, a community for non-traditional, like-minded rehab professionals. Do you know someone who would make an excellent guest on our next show? Reach out to us at beyondtheseclinicwalls@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening.